Hello, I'm Tom McDonough, and I'm Senior Director of Supply Chain Planning, Product Marketing here at Oracle. Thank you for taking the time to view and consider our perspective on the increasingly important topic of integrated business planning and execution. Today, we're going to look at a few of our customer stories, their journeys with integrated business planning and execution, and their use and application of emerging technologies. From Juniper Networks, Mitch Haynes and Kiran Garlapati will discuss integrated business planning at Juniper and the importance of their partnership with Oracle. Our own John Chorley, Chief Sustainability Officer at Oracle, recently sat down with Simon Ellis, Program Vice President, Supply Chain at IDC, to discuss current innovation trends in supply chain planning and emerging tech. Finally, we will hear from C.W. Fung of Cisco Systems about how Cisco is designing better integrated planning and execution with Oracle supply chain planning and blockchain intelligent track and trace. Following C.W.'s overview, we will conclude with a product demonstration. Let's start by hearing from Juniper about their integrated business planning and execution journey with Oracle.
Our customers really want us to be predictable. That's the magic solution for us. It's been about clearly defining our goals and objectives and making sure that we pick the right partners to be successful. We make about 3,000 products, and the ability to say, this is the supply of product X versus this is, the demand of product X is something that is new and unique. We were really drawn to the commitment that Oracle management had for us to be successful. We could easily move from demand to supply and have that circle completed in the S&OP cycle. One of the things about integrated business planning for me that I can really tell if it's working well or if it's not is how often we're able to go through a challenge and not spend too much time focusing on why we made decisions. It's impossible to know the unknown, but it is possible to make decisions in a connected way.
Now let's talk with a great customer of Oracle Supply Chain Planning Cloud, Juniper Networks, one of the world's leading high-tech companies that develops and markets the networking products that enable our connected world. Kiran, what were some of the key factors you considered and benefits you see in moving from an on-premise-based solution to a SaaS and cloud?
Hey, John, thanks for the question. So Juniper has a cloud-first strategy. What it means is anything that we build homegrown needs to be cloud-enabled or cloud-native. And all vendor applications, we look for SaaS capabilities, right? So that's been the premise. We started looking into the right supply chain planning system. And then we evaluated multiple products and looked into Oracle Supply Chain Cloud. And the key benefits of being on SaaS, not only the reduction in total cost of ownership, there is 99% availability of the system, the new features coming on a quarterly basis, availability of Industry 4.0 technology like AI, blockchain, IoT, etc., and easy access to all our Juniper employees as well as our CM partners through federated controls.
Yeah, and I know that Juniper has, at least at present, a back-end ERP system based on SAP. So what were some of the considerations in adopting Oracle Cloud technology together with your SAP ERP system?
Yeah, we didn't go with an obvious choice. We looked into the capabilities. In fact, our business has written a 60 or 65-page BRD, all credit to Mitch and team. So the BRD has a comprehensive view of what we needed. It's not just about a planning system, but needs to have the execution part as well, the order management capabilities, having visibility to backlog, etc. Right? So we looked into the rich feature set that Oracle SCM Cloud was offering. Then our obvious question was, how do we integrate to our Juniper systems? We did have systems like SAP, ERP, CRM, SFDC for opportunities. That was an important evaluation criteria. We looked into Oracle. What are the integration options? So web services is the key here. Everybody thinks how to integrate SAP or Oracle, but really here the key is web services. I think with rich set of REST APIs that were provided, things were easy. Yeah.
Well, to close, can you share with the audience some ways in which Juniper might use Industry 4.0 technology to improve your supply chain management? Mitch, perhaps begin with you from a business perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we look at the future of planning, we see the artificial intelligence, machine learning landscape being one of the most critical areas that we can invest in. The ability to kind of work and develop some very unique solutions in this space that are deployed in the Oracle platform as a service that allow us to tune our investment strategy really in inventory, right? Whether that's driving a little bit of extra demand or driving some component safety stocks at the right place in our network. I think that's going to be a really big part of how we are successful in the future.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Simon Ellis, Program Vice President at IDC, who I've had the pleasure of working with for many years. Simon is responsible for providing research, analysis, and guidance on key business and IT issues for manufacturers. He currently leads Supply Chain Strategies practice at IDC Manufacturing Insights, where, amongst other things, Simon is directly responsible for the research in the supply chain planning strategies practice. Simon, well, this is an unprecedented time we're going through. As Lisa Chalette at Morgan Stanley said, we've never, ever seen a sudden stop of the economy worldwide. This crisis will be an experiment to understand what the companies are that have a true resilient and recurring revenue stream. I understand that you had just initiated a survey on supply chain planning priorities as this crisis hit. Great timing. Please share some of the insights from that survey.
Yeah, so I do a supply chain survey every 2 years, and it was fortuitous that the most recent version of the survey was actually in the field this past April. So it there are a number of things that we've asked progressively over the course of time. COVID, of course, not one of them. That was new this year to all of us. And we saw some interesting things, right? We saw, you noted and mentioned resiliency, and supply chain resiliency certainly has been one of my favored topics for a while now. And it's, in some ways, it's kind of become the term for 2020, hasn't it? And in the survey, when we asked, for example, companies to identify, what were the critical gaps that they saw in their supply chain, that if they didn't fix them would be really problematic for them in the future. And supply chain resiliency was number one. In the old days, supply chain was a cost center, right? I think of it very much now as an opportunity center, maybe a bit of a goofy term, but companies who haven't thought about supply chain planning, who haven't thought about transforming their supply chains, I think they'll find themselves disadvantaged. In that same survey, we asked about, the idea of kind of digital supply chain opportunities, right? And it was things like robotics, certainly, but it was collaboration platforms and planning, integrated supply chain planning platforms and ecosystems and networks. But at the end of the day, it's beginning, I think, John, the process of pulling these together and leveraging the power of all of these technologies in the context, of platforms and of ecosystems.
Yeah, and I think that there's maybe a thought that, black swan events, if you like that phrase, like COVID, they undermine the traditional idea of planning, in particular demand forecasting. But I know you and I have discussed that. There are ways to manage those challenges. Perhaps you can speak to that.
Yeah, so people talk about COVID as a once in a century event, once in a lifetime event. Hopefully it is. But there are plenty of other kinds of disruptions that we've seen, whether it's volcanoes, whether it's earthquakes, whether it's floods. And so I think, the black swan event, unfortunately, is becoming more and more prevalent. And so I think we have to start thinking about forecasting and demand sensing and demand planning in the context of how do we start to understand these unusual, I use this term unusual, these unusual variables, right? How do we think about the things that perhaps we've not traditionally built into forecasting, because I think they're going to be more important. I think they're going to be more relevant. I mean, you're the chief sustainability officer of Oracle. Climate change is potentially a huge problem for the supply chain, particularly when you think about the ability to source ingredients and components. And I just think if we're going to think differently about the supply chain from a supply and demand perspective, we have to be able to build in these kinds of unusual triggers of demand, both up and down.
Are there some specific strategies that you would suggest that people look at, that adopt, and maybe some stories about examples that you've seen in your engagement with customers?
Yeah, so I think it's, in a way, John, it kind of goes back to this idea of resiliency, right? And so, I think about, and maybe this is a little simplistic, but I think about, visibility plus agility equals resiliency, right? So if I see what's happening, but I can't do anything about it, I'm not resilient. If I've got enormous capacity to do something about it, but I don't see it, I'm not resilient, right? And so I think what we've seen, and it depends a lot on the industry, right? If you were unlucky enough to be in an industry that got hugely impacted on the demand side, probably no matter how resilient your supply chain was, you still got hit hard. So I think the examples for me at least are, companies who saw early, but then had the ability, whether it was crisis management teams, whether it was the kind of black swan predictive events and the ability to build those into the supply chain planning process. I think those were the kinds of companies that have performed better and will perform better in the future.
Absolutely. And if you had to pinpoint an area for investment for any given company to think about, how to position themselves well to do well after this recovery hopefully kicks in, what would that be? Are there specific areas that you'd focus on?
So I'm a supply chain planning guy, first and foremost. So, I think I've always said, if you don't get supply chain planning right, you don't get the supply chain right. For me, I think it's ultimately about agility, right? I think that, we have all of this data coming at us, volumes, variety, unstructured, structured. Some companies have leveraged it better than others, but everybody's leveraged it at least to some degree, right? So we have all of this data coming at us. I think the question is, can we do anything with it, right? So I think how we look at inventory optimization, how we look at supply linked demand planning, I think are all areas, for me at least, where companies ought to focus. I'm not dismissing the importance of transportation and warehousing and global trade, but I do think, again, if you don't get planning right, you don't get the rest of that stuff right either. And so for me, at least as a long-term supply chain planning guy, it really is very much around agility and supply chain planning driven agility.
Hi, my name is C.W. Fong. I'm part of the supply chain transformation team at Cisco System. I would like to share with you the supply chain orchestration framework that we have implemented and with partnership with Oracle and Trinomics. Let me start with the Cisco supply chain. Cisco supply chain is a very global. We operate in 14 countries, about 40 locations. From a product portfolio perspective, it can be anything from a high volume build to stock to a much complex configure to order, from a low-end product like an IP phone to a mid-range router and switches, and then followed by the high-end router. Cisco supply chain is organized by development supply chain and fulfillment supply chain. The development supply chain is focusing on the taking the product from a design stage to NPI to launch and to volume ramp. The fulfillment is focusing on how to deliver the product to meet the customer expectation and the product lead time. I'm part of the supply chain transformation team that focus on the acquisition integration, security, sustainability, and risk management. In this supply chain orchestration, we try to develop a supply chain event orchestrator that basically take all the event triggers and really orchestrate and route the events to the right companies and stakeholders that need to be informed. Okay, in this view, we can have any events that from a few failures to a demand upside, demand downside, natural disaster like earthquake and as well as tsunami, including the pandemic that we've seen. Okay, just imagine this particular event, right, goes into the event orchestrator, and the event orchestrator will basically notify all the downstream subscribers that care about these events. The goal for supply chain orchestration is really to deliver customer commitment and also maintaining the revenue for the company, and also try to include this orchestration into our product portfolio. The goal is really about mitigating the customer's impact based on all these events that happen across the world. If you look at the orchestration network, right, it's really about creating this invisible orchestration fabric that connect all these raw material suppliers to the wafer providers, the semiconductor chip makers, including contract manufacturers and OEM, logistics distributor, as well as the customers. This orchestration fabric will basically notify all the events around the world and be able to get to the right stakeholder, the subscriber to the events. With this particular orchestration framework, we will be able to see the end-to-end visibility of the impact, as well as how each of the company is making decision. So this blockchain is the building block as part of the orchestration network, is to make sure that all this data will be secured from a source of record and a proof of transactions. The goal for us is really to combine both the blockchain network to the orchestration fabric to create a total solution for the customers.
Thank you, CW. In today's demonstration, we'll show how CW and his team can work to resolve an unexpected spike in demand with all supply chain participants. Due to time constraints and our focus on integrated execution in the demonstration, the role of integrated business planning is assumed to be handed off with a predetermined set of integrated workflows. As highlighted by CW, we'll be using blockchain intelligent track and trace for secure and immutable order management and Event Hub for event orchestration. There are many events that can trigger a workflow, such as the one in this demonstration focused on a demand spike, supply chain costs, material or capacity problems, quality, logistics, or customs issues, just to name a few. Today's demonstration focusing on a spike in demand, which triggers a predetermined workflow involving an OEM, a contract manufacturer, and a component supplier is next.
Integrated Business Planning and Execution from Oracle unites Oracle Cloud Supply Chain Planning and Execution with common user interfaces and facilitated information flow. Normally, Oracle Cloud Sales and Operations Planning would evaluate a demand spike and initiate orchestration of the integrated business process. However, to save time in this demo, we'll trigger the demand spike workflow directly by entering a sales order in Oracle Cloud Order Management. Opening the Oracle Blockchain Intelligent Track and Trace application, I see a geographical view of the demand spike workflow participants: Cisco, a contract manufacturer, and a component supplier. We'll search for the sales order in the ITT system to pick up the thread. An event notification through supply chain planning would normally have initiated a link to this workflow. Selecting the sales order opens the workflow view. The demand spike response steps that haven't completed yet are faded out. Step 1 is to review the order information to see why the event management workflow was initiated. We've navigated to the event in the document tracing view now. We can scroll up or down the track and trace chart on the left to view documents and events at various stages of completion. Scrolling simultaneously raises status information as you look to the right. In the center, a geographical view gives you a broader perspective when you're monitoring many active event flows. while the panel on the right displays details of the document or event that you've selected. In this case, we can see the order number, the date, customer name, and transaction value. Now we'll return to the document management list. In the interim, the Cisco planners and buyers initiate the expedited purchase order. Task automation is possible, but again, for demonstration purposes, we'll walk through the steps interactively. In the tracing chart, we can scroll down to the contract manufacturer's workflow to verify that they received the purchase order. On the right, you can view its receipt date, transaction value, and item numbers. As the process continues, we'll monitor the demand spike workflow to see how far the workflows and events have progressed to completion. In this last workflow step, the component supplier has received a purchase order from the contract manufacturer and has provided a receipt acknowledgement. Scrolling over the end supplier workflow, we can quickly review the purchase order number, the buyer, and the order amount for the component. We can also scroll over the PO acknowledgement to see the document and order numbers at a glance. Migrating to the supporting document, we can see that the supplier is requiring UPS next day air shipment as a condition of their acknowledgement and supply commit. Returning to the tracing chart, we can see that the Intelligent Track and Trace blockchain is managing all of the documents related to this demand spike workflow in chronological order. We want to look at the PO acknowledgement from this perspective, which is visible to all parties involved in the smart contract arrangement. To the right, we can see the details that a warning alert has been generated. This warning will be delivered to the owner that you see at the top of the panel. The warning creates immediate urgency for Cisco planners to review the workflow status, where they'll see that there's an email notification alert that states that the shipping method has been updated to meet the demand spike. Cisco will need to approve this additional expense. Returning to the demand spike workflow view one last time, we can conclude by showing how users have the flexibility to see the entire flow, but depending upon their user security settings, they may have limited access to document and event information.
Thank you for joining us to learn more about integrated business planning and execution from Oracle. If you'd like more information, visit the website on this page or scan the QR code now.